Chapter 6: Abstract Models of Economic Systems. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we continue our study of politics and economics by turning to abstract models of economic systems. If Chapter 5 introduced us to real-world economic models like capitalism, socialism, communism, and mixed economies, Chapter 6 steps back and asks us to think more conceptually. What happens when we strip these systems down to their pure forms? Let's start with what an abstract model is. In political science, an abstract model isn't something you'll find fully in practice. Rather, it's an ideal type, a simplified version that highlights the core logic of a system. By comparing abstract models, we can better understand the trade-offs between liberty and equality, efficiency and fairness, freedom and security. The first model is capitalism in its pure form. Abstract capitalism means 1. Complete private ownership of the means of production. 2. Goods and services allocated entirely by the free market. 3. Minimal to no government interference. 4. Wages and prices set only by supply and demand. In theory, this system maximizes individual liberty and efficiency. But the weaknesses are clear. Without regulation, monopolies could dominate markets, workers could be exploited, and inequality could grow unchecked. In reality, no society has ever practiced pure capitalism. Even the United States has regulations, taxes, and public programs. The first model to consider is capitalism in its pure form, sometimes called laissez-faire capitalism or abstract capitalism. In theory, this system pushes the principles of market freedom to their absolute limit. Under pure capitalism, there is complete private ownership of the means of production. Factories, land, businesses, and resources are controlled entirely by individuals or corporations, with no state ownership. All goods and services are allocated solely by the free market, meaning that the interaction of buyers and sellers, guided by supply and demand, determines what is produced, how much is produced, and at what price. In such a model, the government plays little to no role. It does not set minimum wages, regulate working conditions, or impose taxes for social programs. Instead, its sole responsibility is to protect property rights and enforce contracts. Prices and wages rise or fall according to market forces alone, with no safety nets or interventions. However, the weaknesses of pure capitalism are equally clear. Without any form of regulation, monopolies and oligopolies could dominate markets, eliminating competition and exploiting consumers. Workers could face harsh conditions, low wages, and little bargaining power, since employers would have no legal obligation to protect their well-being. Wealth would likely become increasingly concentrated, with a small elite accumulating massive resources while the majority struggle. Environmental degradation could also worsen, since companies would have no incentive to protect natural resources if profits are the only guiding principle. For these reasons, pure capitalism has never existed in practice. Even societies that lean heavily toward free market principles, such as the United States, still maintain regulations, taxes, and public programs. Antitrust laws prevent monopolies, labor laws set workplace standards, and social programs like Social Security, Medicare, and public education provide safety nets. In this sense, all modern economies are mixed economies, blending capitalist freedom with varying degrees of state oversight and social protections. Thus, pure capitalism remains more of an ideal type or thought experiment, useful for understanding the logic of market freedom in its extreme form, but not a system any nation has fully adopted. Advocates of pure capitalism argue that this system maximizes individual liberty, efficiency, and innovation. People are free to pursue their own interests without interference. Entrepreneurs can take risks and reap rewards, and competition drives businesses to improve products and lower prices. In theory, this unrestricted pursuit of self-interest generates the greatest prosperity for society as a whole. The second model is socialism in its pure form. Abstract socialism means 1. Collective or public ownership of the means of production. 2. Economic planning replaces market competition. 3. Wealth redistributed to ensure equality. 4. The goal is not efficiency or profit, but equity and social justice. In theory, this system maximizes fairness and equality. But again, weaknesses emerge. Central planning may lead to inefficiency, bureaucratic waste, or suppression of individual freedom. Pure socialism doesn't exist in practice either. Nations like Sweden or Norway blend socialism's equality goals with market mechanisms. The second model is socialism in its pure form, sometimes referred to as abstract socialism. Just as pure capitalism pushes market freedom to its extreme, pure socialism pushes collective ownership and equality to their fullest expression. Under this model, there is collective or public ownership of the means of production. Factories, farms, land, and resources are owned by the state or by the community as a whole, rather than by private individuals or corporations. The aim is to eliminate the unequal distribution of wealth that arises when a small group controls the engines of production. Instead of market competition deciding what gets produced and at what price, economic planning replaces the market mechanism. Central authorities, often state agencies, determine how resources are allocated, which industries to prioritize, and how goods and services are distributed. Prices, wages, and investments are deliberately set to meet social needs, not dictated by supply and demand. Yet, as with pure capitalism, the weaknesses of pure socialism become apparent in practice. Without the competitive pressures of a market, there is the risk of inefficiency, stagnation, and waste. Central planning may misallocate resources, producing shortages of some goods and surpluses of others. Bureaucracies tasked with managing the economy can become bloated, rigid, or corrupt. Perhaps most significantly, pure socialism often requires strong state control, which can lead to the suppression of individual freedoms, for example, limiting entrepreneurial initiative, restricting consumer choice, or silencing political dissent in the name of maintaining equality. For these reasons, pure socialism has never existed in practice. Even countries that lean strongly towards socialist ideals adapt their systems by incorporating market mechanisms. Modern social democracies such as Sweden, Norway, and Denmark provide good examples. They blend socialism's equality goals, such as universal healthcare, free education, and strong welfare programs, with the dynamism of market economies. Businesses remain privately owned and competitive, but the state ensures redistribution through taxation and regulation, producing a balance between efficiency and fairness. Thus, like pure capitalism, pure socialism is more of an ideal type, a theoretical model that helps us think about the values of equality and justice, but one that no society has implemented in absolute form. In reality, most nations experiment with hybrid systems, trying to capture the best of both approaches while avoiding their extremes. Wealth is also subject to redistribution, ensuring that resources are shared more equally across society. Taxes or direct allocation guarantee that the basic needs of all citizens, food, housing, healthcare, and education, are met. In such a system, the goal is not efficiency, profit, or competition, but rather equity and social justice. Everyone is entitled to a fair share, regardless of differences in skill, background, or economic position. In theory, pure socialism seeks to maximize fairness and equality. By removing private ownership and profit motives, it hopes to prevent exploitation, close the gap between rich and poor, and create a society where collective welfare is prioritized over individual gain. This vision appeals to those who see capitalism as inherently unjust and who believe that markets place too much power in the hands of the wealthy. The third model is communism, which can be understood as socialism carried to its furthest ideal. If socialism emphasizes collective ownership and redistribution, communism takes this logic to its ultimate conclusion: the complete abolition of private property, class divisions, and even the state itself. In theory, this model represents the pinnacle of equality and solidarity. By eliminating competition, exploitation, and hierarchy, communism seeks to create a world where every individual can flourish without fear of poverty, domination, or exclusion. The pursuit of justice reaches its most radical form, promising an end to the alienation and inequality that have characterized human history. Yet the weaknesses of communism as an abstract model quickly emerge when attempts are made to implement it. Without markets or prices to signal supply and demand, coordinating production and distribution becomes immensely difficult. The absence of private incentives can stifle innovation and efficiency. More critically, because communism envisions a stateless society yet requires massive transformation to reach that stage, revolutionary movements historically built powerful centralized states to enforce the transition. In practice, therefore, communism did not lead to stateless utopias, but rather to strong authoritarian regimes. The Soviet Union, Maoist China, and other communist states abolished private property and centralized economic planning under state control, but in doing so they created new hierarchies of power. Instead of dissolving the state, they vastly expanded it, often repressing dissent, restricting individual freedoms, and using coercion to maintain control. While some communist regimes achieved rapid industrialization or provided basic social services, they frequently struggled with inefficiency, shortages, and stagnation. Thus, communism remains more of a radical ideal than a lived reality. It continues to inspire some as a vision of ultimate equality, but its historical record reveals the dangers of concentrating power in the name of abolishing it. Like pure capitalism and pure socialism, it is best understood as an ideal type, a theoretical endpoint that helps us think about values of justice, equality, and freedom, but one that no society has ever fully realized. In this abstract model, there is no private property. All resources, tools, and means of production are owned collectively. There are no social classes because distinctions between rich and poor, employer and worker, ruler and ruled, have been erased. Most radically, there is no state. Since the state is seen by Marxist theory as a tool of class domination, it would become unnecessary in a truly classless society. Instead, production is fully communal, organized by the free cooperation of individuals. Goods are distributed not according to profit or merit, but based solely on need, expressed in the famous Marxist slogan, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." The value of these abstract models is not that they exist in reality, but that they provide benchmarks. They help us evaluate where actual countries fall on the spectrum. The US, for example, is capitalist, but includes socialist features like public education and Medicare. China calls itself socialist, but incorporates market reforms. Most nations operate as hybrids. Now here's the political connection. Debates between left and right, progressives and conservatives, are really about how far we should lean toward one model or the other. Conservatives argue for less government intervention, moving closer to abstract capitalism. Progressives argue for stronger public programs, moving closer to abstract socialism. Political arguments, in other words, are fights over where on the spectrum we should be. Think about healthcare once again. Should it be left entirely to private markets, like in pure capitalism? Or should it be fully public, guaranteed for all, like in pure socialism? Most countries, including the US, compromise private providers with some government programs. But the abstract models help clarify the values underlying each side of the debate. In conclusion, Chapter 6 reminds us that abstract models are not blueprints for real nations, but analytical tools. They sharpen our understanding of the choices societies face. By thinking about pure capitalism, pure socialism, or communism, we can better see why no system is perfect, and why compromise, the mixed economy, is the reality for most modern democracies. As we move into Chapter 7, we'll shift from economics to institutions, focusing on federalism and how power is divided between national and state governments.